bottom line is when you have those gaps, you need to not just fill the need, you need to fill it with the right people.
Welcome, listeners, to the Industrial Security Podcast. My name's Nate Nelson. I'm here as usual with Andrew Ginter, Vice President of Industrial Security at Waterfall Security Solutions. He's going to introduce the subject and guest of our show today. Andrew, how are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Nate. Our guest today is Jason Rivera. He is a director with Security Risk Advisors, and he's going to be talking to us about three different strategies for, what he calls bridging the capabilities gap. Three different approaches to figuring out what kind of people do you really need when you're trying to take your industrial security program to the next step. Three different approaches.
Okay, then let's get into it.
Hello, Jason, and thank you for joining us. Before we get started, could you maybe say a few words about yourself and about the good work that you're doing at Security Risk Advisors?
Of course. Thank you, Andrew, and thanks for having me on here. I'm a director with Security Risk Advisors. I've been with SRA for a little bit more than 8 years and have spent the past few years solely focused on cyber physical system security. That is your OT, IoT, IIoT, IOMT, and other types of systems that bridge the cyber and physical worlds. A lot of my work has been with OT in manufacturing environments, but I've also worked a good amount with OT and IoT in distribution and Internet of Medical Things in healthcare environments. So I'm really glad to be here. I've gotten a lot of good experience over the years and happy to share some thoughts with you guys today.
Our topic today is bridging workforce capability gaps in, of course, the industrial cybersecurity space. Can you talk about that? Can you talk about the problem? What problem are we solving here?
So, Andrew, securing cyber physical systems is very new for many organizations. OT and IoT have entirely different requirements than IoT. They're different systems, they're different environments, they have different purposes, and the traditional IT mindset just doesn't cut it most of the time. Of the organizations I'm working with today, the biggest challenge I'm seeing isn't your typical controls and standards and policy, insurance, and other, I'll call off-the-shelf principles. It's really the strategy behind who manages an incident, who decides on if a site shut down for containment, who owns the cybersecurity risk of unpatched assets at the site, and even who from the CSOC leads the alert review and analysis of anomalous or unexpected behavior on a PLC, who from global security answers on what your AV and next-gen AV policies are enabled to a site's third-party vendor, right? So most organizations are really grappling with this and trying to determine not only a strategy, but a plan of action for how they can go about solving this unique resourcing need for OT security.
What does that add up to? Do you folks, have a strategy document, a strategy in your pocket, and you pull it out and say, here, use this? Or, is this something that's sort of per industry, or, is this something you have to invent as you go? How, what is a strategy and where does it come from?
That's a great question, Andrew. And I think what might be most helpful is if we focus for a moment on strategy and that word. So to me, that is a strategy is a plan of action for dealing with something either expected or unexpected. So if we take for an example here, a global manufacturing business with a heavy OT footprint, they have many locations across the globe. Actually defining who responds to an OT cybersecurity incident shouldn't be accidental or happenstance. So in my experience, organizations trying to solve for this need are using either one of three different strategies. First being a role-based strategy, where they're more targeted and focused on meeting a specific role for the organization. A regional strategy, which is less about the role or the skills and more to the physical placement of that person to meet any kind of language or cultural or compliance requirements. And the third of those strategies is actually more skill-based, where really they have a defined program, they have a lot of different things that they're looking at solving, and they're focused on a few skilled individuals to come in and be part of a larger effort.
And you mentioned, three types of strategy. You mentioned role-based. I mean, I think we all know what role-based means when it comes to, I don't know, permissions. Backup administrators need different permissions than, accountants and salespeople. Um, but what does strategy mean? How when you put strategy in front of role-based, what's a role-based strategy?
Yeah, to a role-based strategy is part of looking at the entire OT security or your industrial security, cyber physical system security program or initiatives, and saying, well, okay, we have we're a leaner organization, maybe, right? And so we have a handful of sites. And because we don't have a ton of technology debt and we have some reasonably good processes, then we just need a good engineer, right? Because you have a good engineer who understands security principles, knows the difference of operational technology, industrial control systems, and those environments enough to know that you can't do certain things in those environments that you would normally do in IT, right? So this security engineer has been identified as the right fit for this organization because they understand their role, right? And the organization has decided that needing an engineer is the biggest bang for the buck. If they bring in an OT cybersecurity engineer, this is a person who's going to be able to handle technology issues right out of the gate, should be able to run through processes and determine if they are fit for purpose or not, right? And can probably even travel to multiple sites. So why would this organization necessarily need to go a different route when a role-based strategy for resourcing and filling that gap for OT security is just the best thing for them to do?
Andrew, I must have missed something about Jason's answer there. It sounds like all he's saying is that for an opening at an organization, you should hire a person who's qualified for that. Like you should hire an engineer for an engineering job. Is there more that he said there?
Kind of, and I've had the benefit of hearing the rest of the interview here. What he's saying is that sometimes it's easy. You have a smaller organization with, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 5 sites. The sites tend to be in the same geography. They speak the same language. They might be in similar time zones. It's the same corporate culture. And these tend to be organizations that, in a sense, are sort of starting from zero, starting from a place where they don't have a mature program, and you need to launch something. Who do you get for that? He's saying, well, this is the easy case. Find an engineer or 3 within the organization, move them to head office, or bring in an engineer or 3 that understands the physical process, has a background in the process, has a background in cybersecurity, or can be trained up on cybersecurity. Give them the job, tell them define our program, roll it out to the sites, make it happen, and they do. This is the easy case. And in a minute, Jason's going to get into more complicated cases. And I think, one of the lessons here is that this is the simple case. And if you use this simple strategy in the more complex scenarios, things start to fall apart. So let's go back and listen in. And your second strategy for, staffing, for finding people who are going to do the job of industrial cybersecurity, your second strategy was regional. Can you talk about that? What's the next level of detail on that? How do you do a regional strategy?
Yeah, a regional strategy is to me, in my experience with working with these clients, is for a high culture kind of hybrid work environment with maybe a wide ecosystem and a little bit more mature in their security. They require local resources, local relationships, and even maybe higher caliber of planning and communications. If you've ever worked in other regions, Andrew, you know that things like that vary. In America, in the U.S., North America, we think these are how we do these things. But you get over to APAC, EMEA, other countries, they have different level of criteria and expectations. So a regional strategy is geared more towards those organizations looking to solve for local or regionalized needs, even if they're looking to make investments on a business level, establish roots, and get their brand, spread across the community. They could have a more mature and robust program and justified hiring from multiple roles supporting OT, of which security is incorporated. So I recently worked with a different Fortune 500 organization who went this route, Andrew. They didn't need boots on the ground so much. They needed strategy and oversight, and their corporate culture demanded that they have resources who are more localized, right, and regionalized to be able to collaborate and communicate effectively.
So real quick, Nate, contrast this the regional strategy with the role-based. Imagine you've got a multinational. You've got a dozen countries, each of which has 4 plants. You've got a dozen languages. You've got a dozen cultures you're working with. Some of these cultures are very detail oriented. Some of them expect to be very collaborative and work things out together. They all speak different languages. Some of them are some of these cultures are very relationship based. They want to work with people. Hiring, the role-based, hiring a handful of engineers at head office and putting a document together in English and at some level of detail and dropping it on 50 plants in a dozen countries. That's a recipe for failure. That this is why we have this next example. And your third example of a strategy was skills-based. If we're finding people to put into security roles, what does it mean to have a skills-based staffing strategy?
A skill-based strategy is more for teams and companies with a wider sprawl and what I'll call business diversity. They might have a high degree of IT/OT convergence, more centralized governance with each roles, and more technology sprawl just across the organization. So they take more of a pieces of the puzzle approach, if you will, which is really, to me, coming down to needs being met by a group of individuals with core competencies. So rather than necessarily looking at it from a role-based perspective, like in one of the other strategies where you say, hey, I need an engineer. This is different because you say, I have an organization, I have 25 different technology stacks. Across those, what I'm really trying to solve for in a lot of ways is being able to communicate, build metrics, and build reporting out of my program. I think what I actually need is someone who understands OT and industrial security, but has a coding background. This way they can work across all the APIs of all these different systems and help me to put together some compelling narratives and metrics. Right, so that's a different type of strategy that focuses more on the skills needed to solve a problem or to join a team or to drive value to an organization, more focused on skills, not necessarily a role or where they sit.
Okay, so to clarify, when you're talking about sort of a skills-based strategy, we're talking about larger organizations. We're not talking about 1 or 2 or 3 skills we're looking for. We're talking about dozens of skills. And really, we're talking about specialization and sort of large teams, lots of specialists, lots of different people. Have I got that right?
Yeah, I think so. One key word in there in particular, I would think less to me around the size of an organization and more to the specialization, to your point. So you might be able to look at it from, maybe an organization has a few people, or maybe they have a couple of dozen. Right? It doesn't really matter their size in that context. What they've identified is that they need to have 1 or 2 people join with these exact skills. Those people joining with those skills round out their entire team, right? And everything that their programs and that their initiatives are trying to solve. So my framing and understanding of this, as I'm seeing it, is in larger organizations. Larger organizations tend to have more of that technology debt and that sprawl to try to achieve. But I wouldn't necessarily say that a larger organization is a prerequisite for taking a skill-based strategy. I think the skill and the specialization of skills is what's trying to be solved there the most.
In the beginning of the industrial security revolution, engineers were told to use IT security principles. Protect the information, we were told. We knew this was a poor fit, but it was all we had. Today, the top security priority at industrial sites is safety. Don't kill anyone. Don't cause an environmental disaster. And the second priority is reliability. Do not shut down our factory or infrastructure. Today, safe and reliable operations use unhackable protections from cyber risks, not just cybersecurity. For a deeper look at the evolution of the revolution, we invite you to download Waterfall's report on the emerging consensus for industrial security engineering. You can access the report at the Waterfall website, waterfall-security.com/engineering-consensus, or just go to the resources menu and click on white papers and ebooks.
All right, Andrew. So we've got these three paradigms: the role-based, skill-based, specialists. I'm not sure that you and Jason got too much into it, but maybe it's a point that's worth making. Different organizations are going to be at different stages in maturity and size. I would imagine from a place of not knowing how this actually works in practice, that you would need to focus more so on finding the right people with the right specialties at the beginning, right? Because there are just going to be certain things that you need to get off the ground, and somebody at the organization is going to have to have a very specific skill set and knowledge base to make that happen for you. But then maybe you get to the point where if you're a medium or large size organization, you have specialists in whatever areas you have them in. So maybe you focus then more on hiring people who have the right kind of skills, people that you like, people that think outside the box, maybe more of those softer skills, because you're not necessarily just trying to plug specific holes. Or maybe I'm wrong.
I got something different out of it. I mean, in my experience, let's talk a large organization sort of evolving from zero to something. I mean, most large organizations aren't at zero at this point. But imagine that they are. If you're starting from zero, even in a large organization, who are you going to bring in first? A specialist on, I don't know, network security? Maybe not. You need to define a program. You need to define roles and responsibilities. You need to define policies. You're probably going to bring in a generalist. Now, and in a sense, it doesn't matter if it's a large organization or a small one. When you're starting, you need a generalist to put the pieces together for you. And then once you start developing some of the high level policies and programs, if you're a large organization with a lot of geographies, now you've got to embrace the regions. You got to bring them into the fold to have a role, to have a say in how all this is working, or they're just going to push back. And so this is where the regional comes in. And in my books, as you mature, as you start rolling stuff out, you're investing in technology. Now you start needing more and more specialists for that brand of firewall, or for this brand of identity and access management, or whatnot. So to me, it's an evolution. Eventually, you need all of this. In short, I think you're right. It does get complicated, and that in fact was the question that I asked Jason next. So let's go back and listen in. So 3 strategies. That makes sense. Each of them is sort of tailored to a specific need, a specific kind of situation. I'm guessing that in practice, it's just not that simple. I mean, can you take us through an example of where it might get complicated, where we might need to start combining elements from more than one strategy?
Yeah, I can. There's one example that I can immediately multiply, because this is actually an interesting example that I have quite a few clients dealing with. And it's going to take us further down the rabbit hole of concept here, but walk with me. And that is into the realm of security operations. If you've ever worked in or around operations, Andrew, it is a very unique thing. It is entirely different from other business units or practices in security. They move differently. They have different requirements, different metrics, reporting KPIs, you name it. Their world is essentially a bucket, and it's really difficult for any operations team to take on new or different, right? But that's exactly what OT is. That's exactly what IoT is. That's exactly what IOMT, you name it. They're all new and different, especially to a traditional security operations team and business and practice of policies, procedures, job aids, work aids, you name it. So the question then becomes, do organizations that are at this stage or at this point in their maturity of their OT security program insource or outsource for OT security operations? Again, it is different, right? So is it a separate team? Is there a separate technology stack for OT security operations or the same technology stack? If it's the same technology stack that you're using in IT, well, how do you separate OT from the IT alerting? And why that's relevant here is, what kind of competencies or capabilities do you need to respond to an OT alert? Can the existing resources learn new skills, or do they need to augment out to bring in other new resources who know OT, right? So if you look at that problem holistically, that whole challenge, it's quite complex. Do you take existing resources from your security operations, cross train them? Do you make them the dotted line between the IT and OT worlds? Or do you look to the outside and decide to outsource and augment, meaning you're not taking on that full spectrum of even tier 1, through tier 3 security operations for OT, because they've decided they don't have the in-house talent and don't want to invest in that way? Great. But now now you need to augment those operations with an SME, because if you outsource all of it, or you dump all of your OT security to a partner, just the partner is still going to even need some sort of internal subject matter expert, right? Someone to show them the landscape of the business, the environments, and introduce who even to work with at the site levels. So there is this more unique and succinct challenge, if you will. And what I'm actually seeing most clients do, which could be more representative of the entire industry, but still, they're deciding to outsource and augment, meaning they're not taking it on. They don't have the time, they don't have the resources, they don't have the expertise, and they're working with partners. But they augment that partner engagement with someone inside their organization to help, right? I think it's a business decision at that point, and it comes back to ultimately what a security strategy consists of. But in that situation, we're seeing most organizations go to the market, go to their partnerships and say, hey, help us. We're not ready yet to do this ourselves. Can you lend a hand? Can you watch our environment for a year or two while we invest and mature our own resources accordingly?
In your experience, what part of industrial cybersecurity tends to get outsourced first, most commonly, and why?
Realistically, what we see outsourced the most is security operations. As I've already mentioned a little bit about operations and how much they're different, one of the inside the bucket of security operations, there are different tiers or levels of job duties and skills. For example, we commonly see terms of tier 1 through tier 3. Tier 1 being your first responder. They're going to catch the ticket, right, and figure out what to do with it from there. Most organizations look at that tier 1 and say, hey, well, is it really worth it for us to invest and have to pay for the benefits and everything required with that full-time employee? Or is it just more feasible to pull in a partner who already has the skills behind OT security operations and knows the difference of IT and OT, and work with the partner because, well, they're already doing all that lifting on the benefits and having that full-time employee. So, looking at the tier 1 person concept, you can apply the same to tier 2. Let's say that tier 3 subjectively is the person that needs to own the escalation and triage and actually take that, situation and call it an incident or not. Well, tier 3 is where you might see those organizations have more of those internal full-time employees, because that is a point now you've at your industrial and your OT security requires more context, more subject matter expertise, more understanding of the business. That is not what your partner is there for. Your partner is there to be that first responder and eyes on glass. they have taken the responsibility for, employing those individuals. So at that point, it's a business trade-off. And that's where I see most organizations focus. It is a skill-based strategy, I would argue, but it is ultimately a business decision to outsource some of those lower level job duties to a partner.
So Nathan, what Jason says here makes a lot of sense to me. I mean, I worked at Industrial Defender a decade and two ago. At Industrial Defender at the time, we had an outsourced SOC capability, and we were monitoring other people's OT networks, and for that matter, some of their IT networks. And it's a big investment. I mean, if you want to staff you want a 24/7 SOC. If you want to staff that any one position in a 24/7 SOC, 24 hours a day, you need 4.5 headcount. You work 8 hours a day. There's 3 8-hour shifts in a day. That's 3 people for the weekdays. You've got another 48 hours to cover on the weekend. Well, 40 hours is another head count, and you've got 8 hours left over. You need another half person to cover those 8 hours and, vacations and sick days and whatnot. And now you've got coverage for one person. Do you want only one person in your SOC? Do you want, people to be able to tap each other on the shoulder and get some advice from each other? If you want 2 and 3 people 24/7, this is a lot of head count. It's not surprising that people outsource these SOCs. And to Jason's point, I don't know that a lot of people today are creating an OT SOC. But even if they're not, even smaller organizations, they might, want to add OT expertise 24/7, through training and personnel in their 24/7 SOC. It might still make sense to outsource, even in the largest organizations where they very much could stand up their own SOC. They have to make a business decision. Is this what I want to do? Do I, strategically, do I have a strategic business advantage in having my own SOC? And if the answer is no, I can buy this expertise. I guess the SOC thing that Jason's talking about is it's a very common debate that I see in organizations, and a lot of them are deciding, to outsource it. You folks, security risk advisors, you provide consulting, you provide advice. I know that you also, you've got a SOC, you provide, if people need it, some of that sort of external capabilities stuff as well. We've talked about the SOC. Can you talk about other things? What other roles, maybe what's the second or the third most common thing that you see people outsource? What do you really not see people outsourcing? Can you talk about sort of what does and doesn't happen in that space?
Yeah, for sure. I think, quite frankly, I think operations is the only thing that gets outsourced. And that most other aspects of industrial OT security are done more in more of like a co-source fashion and not outsource. So when I say co-source, that is working together to meet an initiative or objective or solve a problem. And I'll remind you and anyone listening to this that, when it comes to industrial devices, systems, environments, operational technology, all the different things that make up OT and all the different things that make up IIoT and IoT, they are connected to the business. And every business is different. So when you factor in that strategy of having a defense in-depth architecture or an organizational framework for securing these environments, or a compliance initiative, or specific engineering of tools that are fit for purpose for these environments, all those things could ultimately impact and affect the business, meaning you don't really want to outsource that. You don't necessarily just want to throw that over the fence and have someone do it and throw it back. You need to incorporate business principles and prioritization of things from your business into that. And to directly answer your question, Andrew, I think that's where the majority of outreach from organizations that we work with and across the industry are looking more for co-source these days than outsource. When it comes to operations, you can do that. Outside of operations, it's not the best thing to do most of the time because you need to be able to incorporate the business and speak contextually around the business needs in whatever you're reaching out to that partner for. Security risk advisors, my organization has a proven experience and history of working with organizations as trusted advisors. And I can say the majority of services that we provide under the cyber physical systems umbrella, of which OT and IoT and everything are a part of, are advisory. We do have operations and cyber experience and services for OT. A lot of organizations, they go that route or not, but a lot of the engagements that we have today are more co-sourced for every reason that I just mentioned.
So, Jason, thanks very much for joining us. Before I let you go, though, can you sum up for us what's the most important stuff to take away from this space of filling capability gaps?
Yeah, great question, Andrew. And I think in summary, we've been talking here a lot about the best way to go about filling that OT security need. And the bottom line is when you have those gaps, you need to not just fill the need, you need to fill it with the right people, right? You need to have that OT security experience differentiated from IT security experience. And what we've found to be a very successful model here at Security Risk Advisors is our people working directly with your people, your own people and expertise. That combined collaborative work effort driving towards a common goal is what really works the best time and time again. So I would part you with that knowledge, Andrew, and ask if anything that I've said here makes sense, or if anyone has feedback, including yourself, please feel free to reach out to me. I'm on LinkedIn all the time. I'm quick reaction, responsive, and love to engage in these topics. They are my passion and what drives me through every single day. So thank you, Andrew.
So that was your interview with Jason Rivera. Andrew, any last words to take us out with?
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking back on my own experience. I mean, I've worked for vendors all of my career, but we work with large companies. There's a large company that I recall, a big multinational. I've been working on and off with these people for different vendors for going on 20 years now. So I'm not going to name names, but I remember a decade and a half ago. These folks, the multinational took a run at OT cybersecurity, and they took a very central approach, even though they had operations in, dozens of countries. Took a very central approach. They defined their policies and procedures. They pushed them out, and they got pushback. They stood up a central OT security operations center, a SOC, full of IT people who couldn't interpret the data that they were seeing. Their sites got hacked and the OT SOC didn't notice. So they threw that out. They fired the central team. In my recollection, they told the regions to solve this problem. They told the individual sites, put your own thing together. Nothing happened. Today, they're central again, and they're working with the regions, and they're cooperatively defining policies and systems, and they're starting to make progress. So, I guess the sense I get is that it's easy to get this stuff wrong. You really, if you get it wrong, it's going to be a long haul. So it is important to get the model right, the staffing model, the governance model, if you want to make progress.
Okay. Well, thanks to Jason Rivera for speaking with you, Andrew. And Andrew, as always, thanks for speaking with me.
My pleasure. Thank you, Nate.
This has been the Industrial Security Podcast from Waterfall. Thanks to everybody out there listening.